Okay, welcome to the Closer Reading channel. We're going to start. I was going to start reading the Gravity's Rainbow, but I think we should read this one because I read it before. It's The Crying of Lot 49. It's the book Pynchon wrote before Gravity's Rainbow. And I see that book as a direct sequel to this one. It has all the same themes and has a lot of just basically every kind of thing is borrowed from it. And one thing I actually noticed very recently, the beginning, because a lot of people start Gravity's Rainbow and don't finish it. So the beginning of it is very famous. In fact, it's printed on the inside cover of this one. A screaming comes across the sky. And this book is called The Crying of Lot 49. It's his second book. And that crying and that screaming is the same thing. And what was I talking about recently? The crying that's referenced in of Lot 49. And Lot 49 is meant to be our world and maybe even our universe, and four separate stages of four different kinds of crying. The crying when we're first born into the world, the orgasmic crying out, crying out when you're, in the throes of passion that is the conception for every human life. Mourning, crying when, for the loss of things. And I think, remember there was one more kind, but basically every kind of that's what Pynchon does, is that when you think you have it down, you've really just got the first piece of it, and they just keep going. The layers just get deeper and deeper. And let me start this one. It's quickly, since I read his books, and again, I didn't really like this book the first time I read it. I was just recommended it by someone who just insisted that it was one of the best things they've ever read, and this person really, really loved reading. So I just trusted them and read it again. And every time I've read it since, it's gotten more. It's just given more and more things, and all of Pynchon's books are like that. The first read through is just kind of to know what's going on and kind of get a feel for as much as you can, and then every time afterwards, it's just the loves just build, the connections. You just start noticing more and more of them. All right. All right. It was published in 1964. Crying of Lot 49. 1. One summer afternoon, Mrs. Oedipa Moss came home from a Tupperware party whose hostess had put perhaps too much kitsch in the fondue to find that she, Oedipa, had been named executor, or she supposed executrix, of the estate of one Pierce and Verity, a California real estate mogul who had once lost $2 million in his spare time, but still had assets numerous and tangled enough to make the job of sorting it all out more than honorary. Oedipa stood in the living room, stared at by the greenish dead eye of the TV tube, spoke the name of God, tried to feel as drunk as possible, but this did not work. She thought of a hotel room in Mazatlan whose door had just slammed. It seemed forever. Waking up 200 birds down in the lobby, a sunrise over the library slope at Cornell University that nobody out on it had seen because the slope faces west. A dry, disconsolate tune from the fourth movement of the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra. A whitewashed bust of Jay Gould that Pierce kept over the bed on a shelf so narrow for it, she'd always had the hovering fear it would someday topple on them. Was that how he died? She wondered among dreams, crushed by the only icon in the house. That only made her laugh, out loud and helpless. You're so sick, Oedipa, she told herself, or the room, which knew. That's the fourth kind of crying, is crying when we can't stop laughing, which this book is full of funny things. That was the end of the first paragraph, and maybe okay, there was more than one sentence, but the letter was from the law firm of Warp, Wistful, Kubitschek, and McMingus of Los Angeles, and signed by somebody named Metzger. It said Pierce had died back in the spring, and they'd only just now found the will. Metzger was to act as co-executor and special counsel in the event of any involved litigation. Oedipa had been named also to execute the will in a codicil dated a year ago. She tried to think back to whether anything unusual had happened around then. Through the rest of the afternoon, through her trip to the market in downtown Kinneret among the pines to buy ricotta and listen to the music. Today, she came through the bead curtain entrance around Bar 4 of the Fort Wayne Settecento's Ensemble's Variorium recording of the Vivaldi Kazoo Concerto, Boyd Beaver soloist. Then, through the sun gathering of her majorum and sweet basil from the herb garden. Reading of book reviews in the latest Scientific American, into the layering of lasagna, garlicking of a bread, tearing up of romaine leaves, eventually, oven on, into the mixing of Twilight's whiskey sours, against the arrival of her husband, Wendell, Mucho Mas, from work. She wondered, shuffling back through a fat deck full of days which seemed, wouldn't she be the first to admit it, more or less identical, all pointing the same way, subtly, like a conjurer's deck, any odd one readily clear to a trained eye. It took her to the middle of Huntley and Brinkley to remember that last year, at 3 or so one morning, there had come this long-distance call from where she would never know, unless now he'd left a diary, by a voice beginning in heavy Slavic tones, as second secretary at the Transylvanian consulate, looking for an escaped bat. Modulated to comic Negro, then on to a hostile Pachuco dialect, full of chingas and mariconis. Then a Gestapo officer asking her in shrieks, did she have any relatives in Germany? And finally, his Lamont Cranston voice, the one he talked in all the way down to Mazatlan. Pierce, please, she managed to get in. I thought we had, but Margot, earnestly. I've just come from Commissioner Weston, and that old man in the funhouse was murdered by the same blowgun that killed Professor Quackenbush. Or something. For God's sake, she said. Mucho had rolled over and was looking at her. Why don't you hang up on him? Mucho suggested sensibly. I heard that, Pierce said. I think it's time Wendell Moss had a little visit from the shadow. Silence, positive and thorough, fell. So it was the last of his voices she ever heard. Lamont Cranston. That phone line could have pointed any direction, been any length. Its quiet ambiguity shifted over, in the months after the call, to what had been revived. Memories of his face, body, things he'd given her, things she had now and then pretended not to have heard him say. It took him over, to the verge of being forgotten. The shadow waited a year before visiting, but now there was Metzger's letter. Had Pierce called her last year then to tell her about the codicil? Or had he decided on it later, somehow because of her annoyance and Mucho's indifference? She felt exposed, finessed, put down. She had never executed a will in her life, didn't know where to begin, didn't know how to tell the law firm in LA that she didn't know where to begin. Mucho, baby, she cried in an access of helplessness. Mucho Mas, home, bounded through the screen door. Today was another defeat, he began. Let me tell you, she also began, but let Mucho go first. He was a disc jockey who worked further along the peninsula and suffered regular crises of conscience about his profession. I don't believe in any of it, Ed. He could usually get out. I try. I truly can't. Way down there, further down perhaps than she could reach, so that such times often brought her near panic. It might have been the sight of her so about to lose control that seemed to bring him back up. You're too sensitive. Yeah, there was so much else she ought to be saying. She ought to be saying also, but this was what came out. It was true anyway. For a couple of years, he'd been a used car salesman, and so hyper aware of what that profession had come to mean that working hours were exquisite torture to him. Mucho shaved his upper lip every morning, 3 times with, 3 times against the grain, to remove any remotest breath of a mustache. New blades, he drew blood invariably, but kept at it. Bought all natural, shoulder suits, then went to a tailor to have the lapels made yet more abnormally narrow. On his hair, he used only water, combing it like Jack Lemmon to throw them further off. The sight of sawdust, even pencil shavings, made him wince, his own kind being known to use it for hushing sick transmissions. And though he dieted, he could still not, as Oedipa did, use honey to sweeten his coffee, for like all things viscous, it distressed him. Recalling too poignantly what is often mixed with motor oil to ooze dishonest into gaps between piston and cylinder wall. He walked out of a party one night because somebody used the word cream puff. It seemed maliciously in his hearing. The man was a refugee Hungarian pastry cook talking shop, but there was your Mucho, thin-skinned. Yet at least he had believed in the cars, maybe to excess. How could he not, seeing people poorer than him come in? Negro, Mexican, cracker, a parade 7 days a week, bringing the most god-awful of trade-ins, motorized metal extensions of themselves, of their families, and what their whole lives must be like. Out there so naked for anybody, a stranger like himself, to look at. Frame cockeyed, rusty underneath, fender repainted a shade just off enough to depress the value, if not Mucho himself. Inside, smelling hopelessly of children, supermarket booze, 2, sometimes 3 generations of cigarette smokers, or only of dust. And when the cars were swept out, you had to look at the actual residue of these lives. There was no way of telling what things had been truly refused, when so little, he supposed, came by that, out of fear most of it had to be taken and kept, and what had simply, perhaps tragically, been lost. Clipped coupons promising savings of 5 or 10 cents, trading stamps, pink flyers advertising specials at the market, butts, tooth-shy combs, help-wanted ads, yellow pages torn from the phone book, rags of old underwear, or dresses that already were period costumes, for wiping your breath off the inside of a windshield with so you could see whatever it was, a movie, a woman, or a car you coveted, a cop who might pull you over just for a drill. All the bits and pieces coated uniformly, like a salad of despair, in a gray dressing of ash, condensed exhaust, dust, body waste. It made him sick to look, but he had to look. If it had been an outright junkyard, probably he could have stuck things out, made a career, the violence that had caused each wreck being infrequent enough, far enough away from him to be miraculous, as each death, up to the moment of our own, is miraculous. But the endless rituals of trade-in, week after week, never got as far as violence or blood, and so were too plausible for the impressionable Mucho to take for long. Even if enough exposure to the unvarying gray sickness had somehow managed to immunize him, he could still never accept the way each owner, each shadow, filed in only to exchange a dented, malfunctioning version of himself for another, just as futureless, automotive projection of somebody else's life, as if it were the most natural thing. To Mucho, it was horrible, endless, convoluted incest. Oedipa couldn't understand how he could still get so upset, even now. By the time he married her, he'd already been 2 years at the station, KCUF, and the lot on the pallid, roaring arterial was far behind him. Like the Second World or Korean Wars were for older husbands. Maybe, God help her, he should have been in a war. Japs in trees, Krauts in tiger tanks, gooks with trumpets in the night. He might have forgotten sooner than whatever it was about the lot that had stayed so alarmingly with him for going on 5 years. 5 years! You comfort them when they wake pouring sweat or crying out in the language of bad dreams. Yes, you hold them. They calm down. One day they lose it. She knew that. But when was Mucho going to forget? She suspected the disc jockey spot, which he'd got through his good buddy, the KCUF advertising manager, who'd visited the lot once a week. The lot, being a sponsor, was a way of letting the top 200 and even the news copy that came jabbering out of the machine all the fraudulent dreams of teenage appetites, being a buffer between him and that lot. Want to pause for a second? So he wakes up crying in the language of bad dreams. I think that's the first time the word crying is used in it, but tears are all over this book. The word lot in that one paragraph is mentioned, I don't know, at least 5 times. He's putting up red flags. This is what the book is about. This endless, convoluted incest, this used car lot is not Lot 49. Lot 49 is something different. You won't find out until the end. But this is what everything in this book is a symbol for, and a continued symbol of what Lot 49 is also this car lot, which is a symbol for everything on planet Earth. Back to the book. He had believed too much in the lot. He believed not at all in the station. Yet to look at him now, in the twilight living room, gliding like a large bird in an updraft toward the sweating shaker full of booze, smiling out of his fat vortex ring center, you'd think all was flat, calm, gold, serene. Until he opened his mouth. Today, Funch, he told her, pouring, had me in, wanted to talk about my image, which he doesn't like. Funch being the program director and Mucho's great foe. I'm too horny now. What I should be is a young father, a big brother. These little chicks call in with requests. Naked lust to Funch's ear. Throbs in every word I say. So now I'm supposed to tape all the phone talk. Funch, personally, will edit out anything he considers offensive, meaning all of my end of the conversation. Censorship, I told him. Fink, I muttered and fled. He and Funch went through some such routine maybe once a week. She showed him the letter from Metzger. Mucho knew all about her and Pierce. It had ended a year before Mucho married her. He read the letter and withdrew along a shy string of eye blinks. What am I going to do? She said. Oh no, said Mucho. You got the wrong fella, not me. I can't even make out our income tax right. Execute a will? There's nothing I can tell you. See Roseman, their lawyer. Mucho, Mucho, Wendell. It was over before he put my name on it. Yeah, yeah, I meant only that, Ed, I'm not capable. So next morning, that's what she did. Went and saw Roseman. After half After a half hour in front of her vanity mirror, drawing and having to redraw dark lines along her eyelids that each time went ragged or wavered violently before she could take the brush away. She'd been up most of the night after another 3 in the morning phone call. Its announcing bell, clear cardiac terror. So out of nothing did it come. The instrument, 1 second inert, the next screaming. It brought both of them instantly awake, and they lay, joints unlocking, not even wanting to look at each other for the first few rings. She finally, having nothing she knew of to lose, had taken it. It was Dr. Hilarious, her shrink or psychotherapist. But he sounded like Pierce doing Gestapo officer. I didn't want to wake you up, did I? He began dry. You sound so frightened. How are the pills? Not working? I'm not taking them, she said. You feel threatened by them? I don't know what's inside them. You don't believe they're only tranquilizers? Do I trust you? She didn't, and what he said next explained why not. We still need 104th for the bridge. Chuckling aridly, the bridge, Die Brook, being his pet name for the experiment he was helping the community hospital run on the effects of LSD 25, mescaline, psilocybin, and related drugs on a large sample of suburban housewives. The bridge inward. When can you let us fit you into our schedule? No, she said. You have 500,000 others to choose from. It's 3 in the morning. We want you. Hanging in the air over her bed, she now beheld the well-known portrait of Uncle that appears in front of all our post offices, his eyes gleaming unhealthily, his sunken yellow cheeks most violently rouged, his finger pointing between her eyes. I want you. She had never asked Dr. Hilarious why, being afraid of all he might answer. I'm having a hallucination now. I don't need drugs for that. Don't describe it, he said quickly. Well, was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Did I call you? I thought so, he said. I had this feeling. Not telepathy, but rapport with the patient is a curious thing sometimes. Not this time, she hung up, and then couldn't get to sleep, but would be damned if she'd take the capsules he'd given her. Literally damned. She didn't want to get hooked in any way. She told him that. So, he shrugged, on me you are not hooked? Leave then, you're cured. She didn't leave. Not that the shrink held any dark power over her, but it was easier to stay. Who'd know the day she was cured? Not him. He admitted that himself. Pills are different, she pleaded. Hilarious only made a face at her. One he'd made before. He was full of these delightful lapses from orthodoxy. His theory being that a face is symmetrical like a Rorschach blot, tells a story like a TAT picture, excites your response like a suggested word. So why not? He claimed to have once cured a case of hysterical blindness with his number 37, the Fu Manchu. Many of the faces having like German symphonies both a number and a nickname, which involved slanting the eyes up with the index fingers, enlarging the nostrils with the middle fingers, pulling the mouth wide with the pinkies, and protruding the tongue. On Hilarious, it was truly alarming. And in fact, as Oedipa's Uncle Sam hallucination faded, it was this Fu Manchu face that came dissolving in to replace it, to stay with her for what was left of the hours before dawn. It put her in hardly any shape to see Roseman. But Roseman had also spent a sleepless night, brooding over the Perry Mason television program the evening before, which his wife was fond of, but toward which Rosamond cherished a fierce ambivalence, wanting at once to be a successful trial lawyer, like Perry Mason, and, since this was impossible, to destroy Perry Mason by undermining him. Oedipa walked in, more or less by surprise, to catch her trusted family lawyer stuffing, with guilty haste, a wad of different sized and colored papers into a desk drawer. She knew it was the rough draft of the People of the Profession v. Perry Mason, a not so hypothetical indictment, and had been in progress for as long as the TV show had been on the air. "You didn't used to look guilty, as I remember," Oedipa said. They often went to the same group therapy sessions, in a carpool with a photographer from Palo Alto who thought he was a volleyball. "That's a good sign, isn't it?" "You might have been one of Perry Mason's spies," said Rosamond. After thinking a moment, he added, "Ha ha." "Ha ha," said Oedipa. They looked at each other. "I have to execute a will," she said. "Oh, go ahead then," said Rosamond. "Don't let me keep you." "No," said Oedipa, and told him. "Why would he do a thing like that?" Rosamond puzzled. After reading the letter. "You mean die?" "No," said Rosamond. Name you to help execute it." He was unpredictable. They went to lunch. Rosamond tried to play footsie with her under the table. She was wearing boots and couldn't feel much of anything, so insulated she decided not to make a fuss. "Run away with me," said Rosamond when the coffee came. "Where?" she asked. That shut him up. Back in the office, he outlined what she was in for. Learn intimately the books and the business. Go through probate, collect all debts, inventory the assets, get an appraisal of the estate, decide what to liquidate and what to hold on to, pay off claims, square away taxes, distribute legacies. "Hey," said Oedipa, "can I get somebody to do it for me?" "Me," said Rosamond. "Some of it, sure. But aren't you even interested?" "In what?" "In what you might find out." As things developed, she was to have all manner of revelations, hardly about Pearson Ferrari or herself, but about what remained, yet had somehow before this stayed away. There had hung the sense of buffering, insulation. She had noticed the absence of an intensity, as if watching a movie just perceptibly out of focus, that the projectionist refused to fix, and had also gently conned herself into the curious Rapunzel-like role of a pensive girl, somehow, magically, prisoner among the pines and salt fogs of Kinneret, looking for somebody to say, "Hey, let down your hair." When it turned out to be Pierce, she'd happily pulled out the pins and curlers, and down it tumbled in its whispering, dainty avalanche. Only when Pierce had got maybe halfway up, her lovely hair turned, through some sinister sorcery, into a great unanchored wig, and down he fell, on his ass. But dauntless, perhaps using one of his many credit cards for a shim, he'd slipped the lock on her tower door, and come up the conch-like stairs, which, had true guile come more naturally to him, he'd have done to begin with. But all that had gone on between them had really never escaped the confinement of that tower. In Mexico City, they somehow wandered into an exhibition of paintings by the beautiful Spanish exile Remedios Varo. In the simple painting of the triptych titled Bordando el Manto Terrestre, were a number of frail girls with heart-shaped faces, huge eyes, spun gold hair, prisoners in the top room of a circular tower, embroidering a kind of tapestry which spilled out the slit windows and into a void, seeking hopelessly to fill the void. And all the other buildings and creatures, all the waves, ships, and forests of the earth were contained in this tapestry, and the tapestry was the world. Oedipa, perverse, had stood in front of the painting and cried, No one had noticed she wore dark green bubble shades. For a moment, she'd wondered if the seal around the sockets were tight enough to allow the tears simply to go on and fill up the entire lens space and never dry. She could carry the sadness of the moment with her, that way forever. See the world refracted through those tears, those specific tears, as if indices, as yet unfound, varied in important ways from cry to cry. She had looked down at her feet and known then, because of a painting, that what she stood on had only been woven together a couple thousand miles away in her own tower, had only by accident was only by accident known as Mexico, and so Pierce had taken her away from nothing. There had been no escape. What did she so desire escape from? Such a captive maiden, having plenty of time to think, soon realizes that her tower, its height and architecture, are like her ego, only incidental. That what really keeps her where she is magic, anonymous and malignant, visited on her from outside and for no reason at all. Having no apparatus except gut fear and female cunning to examine this formless magic, to understand how it works, how to measure its field strength, count its lines of force, she may fall back on superstition, or take up a useful hobby like embroidery, or go mad, or marry a disc jockey. If the tower is everywhere, and the night of deliverance no proof against its magic, what else? 2. She left Kinneret then, with no idea she was moving toward anything new. Mucho Mas, enigmatic, whistling, I Want to Kiss Your Feet. A new recording by Sick Dick and the Volkswagens, an English group he was fond of at that time, but did not believe in, stood with hands in pockets while she explained about going down to San Narciso for a while to look into Pierce's books and records and confer with Metzger, the co-executor. Mucho was sad to see her go, but not desperate. So, after telling him to hang up if Dr. Hilarious called, and look after the oregano in the garden, which had contracted a strange mold, she went. San Narciso lay further south near LA. Like many named places in California, it was less an unidentifiable city than a grouping of concepts, census tracts, special purpose bond issue districts, shopping nuclei, all overlaid with access roads on its own freeway. But it had been Pierce's domicile and headquarters, the place he'd begun his land speculating in 10 years ago, and so put down the plinth course of capital on which everything afterward had been built. However rickety or grotesque, toward the sky, and that, she supposed, would set the spot apart, give it an aura. But if there was any vital difference between it and the rest of Southern California, it was invisible at first glance. She drove into San Narciso on a Sunday in a rented Impala. Nothing was happening. She looked down a slope, needing to squint for the sunlight, onto a vast sprawl of houses, which had grown up all together like a well-tended crop from the dull brown earth, and she thought of the time she'd opened a transistor radio to replace a battery and seen her first printed circuit. The ordered swirl of houses and streets from this high angle sprang at her now with the same unexpected, astonishing clarity as the circuit card had. Though she knew even less about radios than about Southern Californians, there were to both outward patterns a hieroglyphic sense of concealed meaning, of an intent to communicate. There'd seemed no limit to what the printed circuit could have told her if she had tried to find out. So in her first minute of San Narciso, a revelation also trembled just past the threshold of her understanding. Smog hung all around the horizon, the sun on the bright beige countryside was painful. She and the Chevy, she and the Chevy seemed parked at the center of an odd religious instant, as if on some other frequency, or out of the eye of some whirlwind rotating too slow for her heated skin even to feel the centrifugal coolness of. Words were being spoken. She suspected that much. She thought of Mucho, her husband, trying to believe in his job. Was it something like this he felt? Looking through the soundproof glass at one of his colleagues, with a headset clamped on and cueing the next record, with movements stylized as the handling of chrism, censer, chalice, might be for a holy man, yet really tuned in to the voices, the music, its message, surrounded by it, digging it, as were all the faithful it went out to. Did Mucho stand outside Studio A, looking in, knowing that even if he could hear it, he couldn't believe in it? She gave it up presently, as if a cloud had approached the sun, or the smog thickened, and so broken the religious instant. Whatever it might have been, started up and proceeded at maybe 70 miles per hour along the singing blacktop onto a highway she thought went toward Los Angeles, into a neighborhood that was little more than the road's skinny right of way, lined by auto lots, escrow services, drive-ins, small office buildings, and factories, whose address numbers were in the 70 and then 80 thousands. She had never known numbers to run so high. It seemed unnatural. To her left appeared a prolonged scatter of wide pink buildings, surrounded by miles of fence, topped with barbed wire and interrupted now and then by guard towers. Soon an entrance whizzed by, two 60-foot missiles on either side, and the name Yoyodyne lettered conservatively on each nose cone. This was San Narciso's big source of employment, the Galactronics division of Yoyodyne Incorporated. One of the giants of the aerospace industry, Pierce, she happened to know, had owned a large block of shares, had been somehow involved in negotiating and understanding with the county tax assessor to lure Yoyodyne here in the first place. It was part, he explained, of being a founding father. Barbed wire again gave way to the familiar parade of more beige prefab cinderblock office machine distributors, sealant markers, bottled gas works, fastener factories, warehouses, and whatever. Sunday had sent them all into silence and paralysis, all but an occasional real estate office or truck stop. Oedipa resolved to pull in at the next motel she saw, however ugly. Stillness and four walls, having at some point become preferable to this illusion of speed, freedom, wind in your hair, unreeling landscape, it wasn't. But the road really was, she fancied, was this hypodermic needle inserted somewhere ahead into the vein of a freeway, a vein nourishing the mainliner LA, keeping it happy, coherent, protected from pain, or whatever passes with the city for pain. But were Oedipa some single melted crystal of urban horse, LA really would be no less turned on for her absence. Still, when she got a look at the next motel, she hesitated a second. A representation in painted sheet metal of a nymph holding a white blossom towered 30 feet into the air. The sign, lit up despite the sun, said Echo Courts. The face of the nymph was much like Oedipa's, which didn't startle her so much as a concealed blower system that kept the nymph's gauze chiton in constant agitation, revealing enormous vermilion-tipped breasts and long pink thighs at each flap. She was smiling a lipstick and public smile, not quite a hooker's, but nowhere near that of any nymph pining away with love either. Oedipa pulled into the lot, got out, and stood for a moment in the hot sun and the dead still air, watching the artificial windstorm overhead toss gauze in 5-foot excursions, remembering her idea about a slow whirlwind, words she couldn't hear. The room would be good enough for the time she had to stay. Its doors opened on a long courtyard with a swimming pool, whose surface that day was flat, brilliant with sunlight. At the far end stood a fountain with another nymph. Nothing moved. If people lived behind the other doors or watched through the windows, gagged each with its roaring air conditioner, she couldn't see them. The manager, a dropout named Miles, maybe 16, with a beetle haircut and a lapelless, cuffless, one-button mohair suit, carried her bags and sang to himself, possibly to her. Miles' song. Too fat to frug. That's what you tell me all the time. When you're really trying to put me down. But I'm hip, so close your big fat lip. Yeah, baby. I may be too fat to frug, but at least I ain't too slim to swim. It's lovely, said Oedipa, but why do you sing with an English accent when you don't talk that way? It's this group I'm in, Miles explained, the Paranoids. We're new yet. Our manager says we should sing like that. We watch English movies a lot for the accent. My husband's a disc jockey, Oedipa trying to be helpful. It's only a 1,000-watt station, but if you had anything like a tape, I could give it to him to plug. Miles closed the door behind them and started in with a shifty smile. In return for what? Moving in on her. Do you want what I think you want? This is the Paola kid here, you know. Oedipa picked up the nearest weapon, which happened to be the rabbit ear antenna off the TV in the corner. Oh, said Miles, stopping. You hate me too. Eyes bright through his bangs. You are a paranoid, Oedipa said. I have a smooth young body, said Miles. I thought you older chicks went for that. He left after shaking her down for 4 bits for carrying the bags. That night, the lawyer Metzger showed up. He turned out to be so good-looking that Oedipa thought at first somebody up there, was putting her on. It had to be an actor. He stood at her door. Behind him, the oblong pool, shimmering silent, in a mild diffusion of light from the nighttime sky, saying, Mrs. Moss? Like a reproach. His enormous eyes, lambent, extravagantly lashed, smiled out at her wickedly. She looked around him for reflectors, microphones, camera cabling, but there was only himself and a debonair bottle of French bejoules, which he claimed to have smuggled last year into California. This rollicking lawbreaker passed the frontier guards. So hey, he muttered, after scouring motels all day to find you, I can come in there, can't I? Oedipa had planned on nothing more involved that evening than watching Bonanza on the tube. She'd shifted into stretched denim slacks and a shaggy black sweater, and had her hair all the way down. She knew she looked pretty good. Come in, she said. But I only have 1 glass. I, the gallant Metzger let her know, can drink out of the bottle. He came in and sat on the floor, in his seat. Opened the bottle, poured her a drink, began to talk. It presently came out that 20-odd years ago, Metzger had been one of those child movie stars performing under the name of Baby Igor. My mother, he announced bitterly, was really out to cashier me, boy, like a piece of beef on the sink. She wanted me drained and white. Times I wonder, smoothing down the hair at the back of his head, if she succeeded. It scares me. You know what mothers like that turn their male children into. You certainly don't look, Oedipa began, then had second thoughts. Metzger flashed her a big, wiry couple rows of teeth, Looks don't mean a thing anymore, he said. I live inside my looks, and I'm never sure. The possibility haunts me. And how often? Oedipa inquired, now aware it was all words. Has that line of approach worked for you, baby Igor? Do you know, Mester said, Inverarity only mentioned you to me once. Were you close? No. I drew up his will. Don't you want to know what he said? No, said Oedipa, and snapped on the television set. Onto the screen bloomed the image of a child of indeterminate sex, its bare legs pressed awkward together, its shoulder length curls mingling with the shorter hair of a Saint Bernard, whose long tongue, as Oedipa watched, began to swipe at the child's rosy cheeks, making the child wrinkle up its nose appealingly and say, Aw, Murray, come on now, you're getting me all wet. That's me, cried Metzger, staring. Good God. Which one? That movie was called, Metzger snapped his fingers, Cashiered. About you and your mother? About this kid and his father, who's drummed out of the British Army for cowardice. Only he's covering up for a friend, see? And to redeem himself, he and the kid followed the old regiment to Gallipoli, where the father somehow builds a midget submarine, and every week they slip through the Dardanelles into the Sea of Marmara and torpedo the Turkish merchantmen, the Father, Son, and Saint Bernard. The dog sits on the periscope watch and barks if he sees anything. Oedipa was pouring wine. You're kidding. Listen, listen. Here's where I sing. And sure enough, the child and dog and a merry old Greek fisherman who had appeared from nowhere with a zither now all stood in front of the Dodecanese process footage of a seashore at sunset, and the kid sang Baby Igor's song. Against the Hun and the Turk, never once do we shirk, my daddy, my doggy, and me. Through the perilous years, like the Three Musketeers, we will stick just as close as can be. Soon our sub's periscope will aim for Constantinople, and again we set hopeful to see. Once more unto the breach, for those boys on the beach, just my daddy, my doggy, and me. Then there was a musical bridge featuring the fisherman and his instrument. Then the young Metzger took it from the top while his aging double, over Oedipa's protest, sang harmony. Either he made up the whole thing, Oedipa thought suddenly, or he bribed the engineer over at the local station to run this. It's all part of a plot, an elaborate seduction plot. Oh, Metzger. You didn't sing along, he observed. I didn't know, Oedipa smiled. On came a loud commercial for Fangosa Lagoons, a new housing development west of here. What of Inverarity's interests? Metzger noted. It was to be laced by canals, with private landings for powerboats, a floating social hall in the middle of an artificial lake, at the bottom of which lay restored galleons, imported from the Bahamas, Atlantean fragments of columns and friezes from the Canaries, real human skeletons from Italy, giant clamshells from Indonesia, all for the entertainment of scuba enthusiasts. A map of the place flashed onto the screen. Oedipa drew a sharp breath. Metzger, on the chance it might be for him, looked over, but she'd only been reminded of her look downhill this noontime. Some immediacy was there again, some promise of hierophany. Printed circuit, gently curving streets, private access to the water, Book of the Dead. Before she was ready for it, back came Cashiered. The little submarine, named the Justine, after the dead mother, was at the quay. Signaling up all lines, a small crowd was seeing it off, among them the old fisherman and his daughter, a leggy, ringleted nymphette who, should there be a happy ending, would end up with Metzger, an English missionary nurse with a nice build on her, who would end up with Metzger's father, and even a female sheepdog with eyes for Murray the St. Bernard. Oh, yeah, Metzger said. This is where we have trouble in the Narrows. It's a bitch because the Kefez minefields. But Jerry has also recently hung this net, this gigantic net, woven out of cables 2.5 inches thick. Oedipa refilled her wineglass. They lay now, staring at the screen, flanks just lightly touching. There came from the TV set a terrific explosion. Mines! Cried Metzger, covering his head and rolling away from her. Daddy, blubbered Metzger on the tube, I'm scared. The inside of the midget sub was chaotic, the dog galloping to and fro, scattering saliva that mingled with the spray from the leak in the bulkhead, which the father was now plugging with his shirt. One thing we can do, announced the father. Go to the bottom. Try to get under the net. Ridiculous, said Metzger. They built a gate in it, so German U-boats could get through to attack the British fleet. All our E-class subs simply use that gate. How do you know that? Wasn't I there? But, began Oedipa, then saw how they were suddenly out of wine. Aha, said Metzger, from an inside coat pocket producing a bottle of tequila. No lemon, she asked, with movie gaiety. No salt? A tourist thing. Did Inverarity use lemons when you were there? How did you know we were there? She watched him fill her glass, growing more and more anti-Metzger as the level rose. He wrote it off that year as a business expense. I did his tax stuff. A cash nexus, brooded Oedipa. You and Perry Mason. Two of a kind. It's all you know about, you shysters. But our beauty lies, explained Metzger, in this extended capacity for convolution. A lawyer in a courtroom in front of any jury becomes an actor, right? Raymond Burr is an actor, impersonating a lawyer, who in front of a jury becomes an actor. Me? I'm a former actor who became a lawyer. They've done the pilot film of a TV series, in fact, based loosely on my career, starring my friend, Manny DePresso, a one-time lawyer who quit his firm to become an actor, who in this plot plays me, an actor, become a lawyer, reverting periodically to being an actor. The film is in an air-conditioned vault at one of the Hollywood studios. Light can't fatigue it. It can be repeated endlessly. You're in trouble, Oedipa told him, staring at the tube, conscious of his thigh, warm through his suit and her slacks. Presently, the Turks are up there with searchlights, he said, pouring more tequila, watching the little submarine fill up patrol boats and machine guns. You want to bet on what'll happen? Of course not, said Oedipa. The movie's made. He only smiled back. One of your endless repetitions. But you still don't know, Metzger said. You haven't seen it. Into the commercial break now roared a deafening ad for Beaconsfield cigarettes, whose attractiveness lay in their filter's use of bone charcoal, the very best kind. Bones of what? Wondered Oedipa. Inverarity knew. He owned 51% of the filter process. Tell me, someday. Right now it's your last chance to place your bet. Are you going to get out of it or not? Are they going to get out of it or not? She felt drunk. It occurred to her for no reason that the plucky trio might not get out after all. She had no way to tell how long the movie had to run. She looked at her watch, but it had stopped. This is absurd, she said. Of course they'll get out. How do you know? All those movies had happy endings. All? Most. That cut down the probability, he told her, smug. She squinted at him through her glass. Then give me odds. Odds would give it away. So, she yelled, maybe a bit rattled, I bet a bottle of something, tequila, all right, that you don't make it. Feeling the words were being conned out of her. That I didn't make it, he pondered. Another bottle tonight would put you to sleep. He decided, no. What do you want to bet then? She knew. Stubborn. They watched each other's eyes for what seemed 5 minutes. She heard commercials, chasing one another into and out of the speaker of the TV. She grew more and more angry, perhaps juiced, perhaps only impatient for the movie to kick on. Fine then, she gave in at last, trying for a brittle voice. It's a bet, whatever you'd like, that you don't make it, that you all turn to carry on for the fish at the bottom of the Dardanelles, your daddy, your doggy, and you. Fair enough, drawled Metzger, taking her hand as if to shake on the bet, and kissing its palm instead, sending the dry end of his tongue to graze briefly among her fate's furrows, the changeless salt hatchings of her identity. She wondered then if this were really happening in the same way as, say, her first time in bed with Pierce, the dead man. But then the movie came back. The father was huddled in a shell hole on the steep cliffs of the Anzac beachhead, Turkish shrapnel flying all over the place. Neither baby Igor nor Murray the dog were in evidence. Now what the hell, said Oedipa. Golly, Metzger said, they must have got the reel screwed up. Is this before or after, she asked, reaching for the tequila bottle. A move that put her left breast in the region of Metzger's nose. The irrepressibly comic Metzger made cross eyes before replying, that would be telling. Come on, she nudged his nose with the padded tip of her bra cup and poured booze, or the bet's off. Nope, Metzger said. At least tell me if that's his old regiment there. Go ahead, said Metzger. Ask questions, but for each answer, you'll have to take something off. We'll call it Strip Botticelli. Oedipa had a marvelous idea. Fine, she told him, but first I'll slip into the bathroom for a second. Close your eyes. Turn around. Don't peek. On the screen, the River Clyde, a collier carrying 2,000 men, beached at Sedel Bar in an unearthly silence. This is it, men, a phony British accent was heard to whisper. Suddenly, a host of Turkish rifles on shore opened up altogether, and the massacre began. I know this part, Metzger told her, his eyes squeezed shut, head away from the set. For 50 yards out, the sea was red with blood. They don't show that. Oedipus skipped into the bathroom, which happened also to have a walk-in closet, quickly undressed and began putting on as much as she could of the clothing she brought with her. 6 pairs of panties in assorted colors, girdle, 3 pairs of nylons, 3 brassieres, 2 pairs stretched slacks, 4 half slips, 1 black sheath, 2 summer dresses, half dozen A-line skirts, 3 sweaters, 2 blouses, quilted wrapper, baby boo peignoir, and an old Orlan muumuu. Bracelets then, scatterpins, earrings, a pendant. It all seemed to take hours to put on, and she could barely walk when she had finished. She made the mistake of looking at herself in the half-length mirror, saw a beach ball with feet, and laughed so violently she fell over, taking a can of hairspray on the sink with her. The can hit the floor. Something broke, and with a great outsurge of pressure, the stuff commenced atomizing. Propelling the can swiftly about the room, Metzger rushed in to find Oedipa rolling around, trying to get back on her feet, amid a great sticky miasma of fragrant lacquer. Oh, for Pete's sake, he said in his baby Igor voice. The can, hissing malignantly, bounced off the toilet and whizzed by Metzger's right ear, missing by maybe a quarter of an inch. Metzger hit the deck and cowered with Oedipa as the can continued its high-speed caroming. From the other room came a slow, deep crescendo of naval bombardment, machine gun, howitzer, and small arms fire, screams and chopped off prayers of dying infantry. She looked up, past his eyelids, into the staring ceiling light, her field of vision cut across by wild, flashing overlights of the can, whose pressure seemed inexhaustible. She was scared, but nowhere near sober. The can knew where it was going, she sensed, or something fast enough, God or a digital machine, might have computed in advance the complex web of its travel. But she wasn't fast enough, and knew only that it might hit them at any moment, at whatever clip it was doing, 100 miles an hour. Metzger, she moaned, and sank her teeth into his upper arm, through the shark skin. Everything smelled like hairspray. The can collided with a mirror and bounced away, leaving a silvery, reticulated film of glass to hang a second before it all fell, jingling into the sink, zoomed over to the enclosed shower where it crashed into and totally destroyed a panel of frosted glass. Thence, around the three tile walls, up to the ceiling, past the light, over the two prostrate bodies, amid its own whoosh and and the buzzing, distorted uproar from the TV set, she could imagine no end to it. Yet presently, the can did give up, in mid-flight, and fall to the floor, about a foot from Oedipa's nose. She lay, watching it. Blimey, somebody remarked. Cool. Oedipa took her teeth out of Metzger, looked around, and saw in the doorway Miles, the kid with the bangs and mohair suit, now multiplied by 4. It seemed to be the group he'd mentioned, the Paranoids. She couldn't tell them apart. 3 of them were carrying electronic guitars. They all had their mouth open. There also appeared a number of girls' faces, gazing through armpits and around angles of knees. That's kinky, said one of the girls. Are you from London? Another wanted to know. Is that a London thing you're doing? Hairspray hung like fog. Glass twinkled all over the floor. Lord love a duck, summarized a boy holding a passkey, and Oedipa decided it was Miles. Deferent, he began to narrate for their entertainment a surfer orgy he'd been to the week before, involving a 5-gallon can of kidney suet, a small automobile with a sunroof, and a trained seal. I'm sure this pales by comparison, said Oedipa, who succeeded in rolling over. So why don't you all just, go outside and sing? None of this works without mood music. Serenade us. Maybe later, invited one of the other paranoids shyly. You could join us in the pool. Depends how hot it gets in here, gang, winked jolly Oedipa. The kids filed out, after plugging extension cords into all available outlets in the other room and leading them in a bundle out a window. Oedipa helped her stagger. Metzger helped her stagger to her feet. Anyone for Strip Botticelli? In the other room, the TV was blaring a commercial for a Turkish bath in downtown San Narciso, wherever downtown was, called Hogan's Seraglio. Inverarity owned that too, Metzger said. Did you know that? Sadist, Oedipa yelled. Say it once more, I'll wrap the TV tube around your head. You're really mad, he smiled. She wasn't, really. She said, what the hell didn't he own? Metzger cocked an eyebrow at her. You tell me. If she was going to, she got no chance. For outside, all in shuddering deluge of thick guitar chords, the Paranoids had broken into song. Their drummer sat up precariously on the diving board. The others were invisible. Metzger came up behind her with some idea of cupping her hands around her breast, but couldn't immediately find them because of all the clothing. They stood at the window and heard the Paranoids sing. Serenade. As I lie and watch the moon on the lonely sea, watch it tug the lonely tide like a comforter over me. The still and faceless moon fills the beach tonight with only a ghost of day, all shadow gray and moonbeam white. As you lie alone tonight, as alone as I, lonely girl in your lonely flat, well, that's where it's at. So hush your lonely cry. How can I come to you, put out the moon, send back the tide? The night has gone so gray, I'd lose the way and it's dark inside. No, I must lie alone till it comes for me, till it takes the sky, the sand, the moon, and the lonely sea. And the lonely sea, etc. Fades out. Now then, Oedipus shivered brightly. First question, Metzger reminded her. From the TV set, the St. Bernard was barking. Oedipa looked and saw baby Igor, disguised as a Turkish beggar lad, skulking with the dog around a set she took to be Constantinople. Another early reel? She said hopefully. I can't allow that question, Metzger said. On the doorsill, the Paranoids, as we leave milk to propitiate the leprechaun, had said a fifth of Jack Daniels. Oh boy, said Oedipus. She poured a drink. Did baby Uyghur get to Constantinople in the good submarine Justine? No, said Metzger. Oedipus took off an earring. Did he get there in, what did you call them? In an E-class submarine? No, said Metzger. Oedipus took off another earring. Did he get there overland, maybe through Asia Minor? Maybe, said Metzger. Oedipus took off another earring. Another earring, said Metzger. If I answer that, will you take something off? I'll do it without an answer, roared Metzger. Shucking out of his coat, Oedipus refilled her glass. Metzger had another snort from the bottle. Oedipus then sat 5 minutes watching the tube, forgetting what she was supposed to ask questions. Metzger took his trousers off earnestly. The father seemed to be up before a court-martial now. So, she said, an early reel. This is where he gets cashiered. Haha. Maybe it's a flashback, Metzger said. Or maybe he gets it twice. Oedipus removed a bracelet. So it went. The succession of film fragments on the tube, the progressive removal of clothing that seemed to bring her no nearer nudity, the boozing, the tireless chivalry of voices and guitars from out by the pool. Now and then a commercial would come in. Each time Metzger would say, Inverarities or Big Block of Shares, and later settled for nodding and smiling. Oedipus would scowl back, growing more and more certain, while a headache began to flower behind her eyes, that they, among all possible combination of new lovers, had found a way to make time itself slow down. Things grew less and less clear. At some point, she went into the bathroom, tried to find her image in the mirror, and couldn't. She had a moment of nearly pure terror, then remembered that the mirror had broken and fallen in the sink. 7 years bad luck, she said aloud. I'll be 35. She shut the door behind her and took the occasion to blunder, almost absently, into another slip and skirt, as well as a long leg girdle and a couple pairs of knee socks. It struck her that if the sun ever came up, Metzger would disappear. She wasn't sure if she wanted him to. She came back in to find Metzger wearing only a pair of boxer shorts and fast asleep with a hard-on and his head under the couch. She noticed also a fat stomach the suit had hidden. On the screen, New Zealanders and Turks were impaling one another on bayonets. With a cry, Oedipus rushed on him, fell on him, began kissing him to wake him up. His radiant eyes flew open, pierced her, as if she could feel the sharpness somewhere vague between her breasts. She sank with an enormous sigh that carried all rigidity like a mythical fluid from her, down next to him, so weak she couldn't help him undress her. It took him 20 minutes, rolling, arranging her this way and that, as if she thought he had some scaled-up, short-haired, poker-faced little girl with a Barbie doll. She may have fallen asleep once or twice. She awoke at last to find herself getting laid. She'd come in on a sexual crescendo in process, like a cut to a scene where the camera's already moving. Outside, a fugue of guitars had begun, and she counted each electronic voice as it came in, till she reached 6 or so, and recalled only 3 of the Paranoids played guitars, so others must be plugging in, which indeed they were. Her climax, and Metzger's, when it came, coincided with every light in the place, including the TV tube suddenly going out, dead black. It was a curious experience. The Paranoids had blown a fuse. When the lights came on again, she and Metzger lay twined amid a wall-to-wall scatter of clothing and spilled bourbon. The TV tube revealed the father, dog, and baby Uyghur trapped inside the darkening Justine as the water level inexorably rose. The dog was first to drown in a great crowd of bubbles. The camera came in for a close-up of baby Igor crying, one hand on the control board. Something short-circuited then, and the grounded baby Uyghur was electrocuted, thrashing back and forth and screaming horribly. Through one of those Hollywood distortions of distortions in probability, through one of those Hollywood distortions in probability, the father was spared electrocution, and so he could make a farewell speech, apologizing to baby Ugor and the dog for getting them into this, and regretting that they wouldn't be meeting in heaven. Your little eyes have seen your daddy for the last time. You are for salvation, I am for the pit. At the end, his shuffling eyes filled the screen. The sound of incoming water grew deafening. Upswelled the strange 30s movie music with the massive sax section. In faded the legend, the end. Oedipa had leaped to her feet and run across the other wall to turn and glare at Metzger. They didn't make it, she yelled. You bastard, I won. You won me, Metzger smiled. What did Inverarity tell you about me? She asked finally. That you wouldn't be easy. She began to cry. Come back, said Metzger. Come on. After a while, she said, I will. And she did. It's the end of chapter 2. I think that's it for tonight. We're about to get to chapter 3, which is a crazy chapter. It's got its own play in it. Hope you enjoyed everything we got through tonight. And again, it progressively gets more and more. I don't know. It feels like the first chapter has the painting. The second chapter has the movie. The third chapter has a play, and each chapter after has, I don't know, just a different vivid scene that you just kind of get more and more of. I mean, you can make up your minds, but I love them all. There's just more and more stuff you notice. But one description I heard was really cool, that when Pynchon wants to cause an illusion, he starts carpet bombing paragraphs or sections of writing with symbols. And one of the big things in this chapter that we just read was the Paranoids, the band that obviously looks like the Beatles. They've all got the Beatle haircuts, the mohair suits, which the Beatles in like Hard Day's Night, the early Beatles, when they all, kind of was really hard to tell them apart. The Paranoids was actually the original name of the Beatles band. And what's the thing? This song Metzger is singing in the beginning. This is I Want to Kiss Your Feet by Sick Dick and the Volkswagens. The Volkswagens Beatle. But there's something about that name Sick Dick as well. Like, I'm not sure if it was like a nickname for John Lennon or something like that. I don't know, but there's something weird to that. And I Want to Kiss Your Feet is I Want to Hold Your Hand. But in the next chapter, we're going to read Oedipa and Metzger go to a play, and that I Want to Kiss Your Feet thing takes on another meaning. But all kinds of things do in this story. It's a crazy book. It's pretty short, honestly. We just read at least a fifth of it, and it's these constant distortions that kind of just build in your mind. It's a really fantastic work, and people who are fans of Gravity's Rainbow will probably notice the movie that we just watched, which is horrific. At first, it sounds like Air Bud or something. It's just like this kid and his dog and his dad. But it's really very, very terrifying. It does not shy away from the realities of war at all. And the glass breaking is a symbol that Pynchon reuses in the beginning of Gravity's Rainbow. The constant mixture of sex and death at the same time. These really, really vivid poetic creations that somehow combine the meaning and shift back and forth between life and death. It's really a top of the line writer, and somebody who, like poetry and like a song, you don't read it once. It's you. Like I said, when we were starting reading, it grows on you and you love it more every time you read it. But yeah, that's all for tonight. Chapter 3 is a monster, so I don't want to start that. I'm already starting to get tired from the first two chapters, but Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll continue this tomorrow.